Tonight, on Life on the Rock, we have Tony Manfredonia, Part 2. We'll see one of his music videos and much more. Welcome to Life on the Rock. Tonight, our guest is Tony Manfredonia. If you remember, we had him on last week. This is the second of a two-part show. And this week, we're going to talk more specifically about his work. It's particularly anchored in some other works he's done. And he's going to tell us about the inspiration for that, what he drew from to make those.
Yeah, and Tony, he's written, already composed 2 albums, and he's got a third one to be released called Anchored. That will be coming out later this year. And we're now going to one of Tony's songs called Rose Water.
Here you are, food and water. Here you are, still asleep, still lost. From afar, you may seem to function, but oh, your eyes cut, and no, your charge is gone. Taking shots just to think clearly, iodine staining all the wounds of your body, and it's killing me. Your whole life's been nothing but rose water, wiping dirt off the center of the universe. And I know it hurts, 'cause there's only so much time before time itself runs out. But there's still some time to live this life. In the end, at least you'll run. 'Cause there's so much more than constant slumber. The morning comes, the light, oh, the light begins to dawn. Taking shots just to think clearly, iodine staining all the wounds of your body, and it's killing me. Your whole life's been nothing but rose water, wiping dirt off the center of the universe. And I know it hurts, 'cause there's only so much time before time itself runs out. But there's still some time to live this life. There's still time. There's still time. There's still time. Don't be afraid to suffer. Just hold on tight, don't let your pain become a parasite.
Well, Tony, welcome back to Life on the Rock.
Thank you.
We've been talking about your faith journey. You're also a music composer. You're a music director at a parish. So you do a lot with music, both secular and religious. And but you've written actually a number of albums too. Mm-hmm. Your first album was Rosewater. Mm-hmm. Your second, Lost at Sea, and then you're coming out with a third called Anchor, which will be your latest here at the end of June.
Yep.
And but I wanted to ask you just some of the things. It was real. You've brought a lot of creativity to some of these albums, but one of them that really struck me was the incorporation of Fulton Sheen. Mm-hmm. That caught my attention. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So in Anchored, the upcoming album, Fulton Sheen has a very special place in my heart. I mean, my dad, even with his work, he's always been kind of influenced by Fulton Sheen's talks, mm-hmm. and I've kind of listened to them over the years. But as I was conceptualizing this album, Anchored, which is really all about spiritual warfare in marriage, using a testimony of my own life, kind of an extreme fallout, and also a miraculous redemption. It's kind of very much a chronological concept album, linear story of a true story in my own life and our marriage. That I was kind of conceptualizing this. I was actually listening to Fulton Sheen's talks about Satan and spiritual warfare and marriage, and I found them incredibly relevant to today. Incredibly relevant.
Oh yeah.
About how marriages and families, that they're just under attack, and I'm like, wow, if this isn't what's going on now. And I found that, okay, if this album is going to be kind of a blend between singer-songwriter and almost cinematic orchestra, I have a lot of room for this almost narrative quality, right? And so using his talks in these instrumental interludes, it's going to kind of guide the listeners through the more spiritual elements of the story, right? My lyrics are going to be not surface level. They're all going to be very kind of faith infused, but having Fulton Sheen there, in theory, he's there, kind of guiding the listeners through the more spiritual elements, I think will just kind of help ground everything together and just kind of help it feel like a solid unit.
Now, Anchored, which is your third album, it is different from the first two albums.
A little bit.
A little bit different? How would you describe your first two albums?
Sure. So Rosewater was all about, Rosewater was really all about the chronic suffering my wife was enduring. Okay. Sort of these health issues that she had. And sort of how did we handle that? And so that album was very much, it was a little bit more intimate. It was a little bit more like your standard instrumentation of like piano, drums, guitar, just kind of a smaller rock sound. Now Lost at Sea was actually all about grief, a reflection on grief. We lost Maria's dad tragically a few years back. And so I felt like I needed to put that somewhere creatively. And so Lost at Sea was that. That was almost the extreme opposite stylistically, where it was all big orchestra, all huge orchestra. That's kind of my first love is big orchestra. Okay. Right? And so Anchored kind of puts that together. Anchored has the big cinematic, almost classical orchestra sound, while also including a bit more rock in there, a little bit more alt rock in there. And it's almost orchestra all the time, plus or minus some drums and guitars and piano. And so for me personally, it felt like the first two, Rosewater and Lost at Sea, almost feel like the precursor to Anchored, because throughout all three, there's a message of hope. Because even though it's about suffering and grief and a downfall and redemption, ultimately a redemption of our marriage, there's this idea of hope that exists throughout all of that. That even through suffering, even through loss, even when we're at our wits' end, that by turning to God, by bringing our hearts and our eyes up to the Lord, that there's always a better tomorrow. Things can always improve. They can always be healed through His glory and through His grace.
Yeah, I think there's so much, I think you're in your own personal life, because you have that experience of the suffering in different ways of seeing your wife suffering, the loss of her father, in a tragic way, and how you express that, a lot of times to bring that out can be very difficult, I would think. But I think that message of hope is so important today, especially when you just kind of look around the world today. You do see a lot of despair. You see a lot of brokenness in our culture and society. A lot of people have turned away from God, from faith, and I don't think, the material world, you have to look up. That is so important. I think a lot of people just, eventually you kind of hit a rock bottom. Where you go, the way things are going are just bad. And there's got to be something good. And unfortunately, a lot of times we hear that so late, we hear it when we're growing up, but it's like, yeah, whatever. But, that is a voice, that sooner or later, we resonate with it. So.
But then that's kind of the mission with, of course, the first two albums, but especially with Anchored, the song Confession, the first single from it that was released already, that's what that song was about, where it was like, I personally am at rock bottom. So I have a choice. I can turn to things that will continue to destroy me, or I can turn to God, I had a choice. And so I kind of a last ditch effort of turning to the Lord, and that saved everything, everything. And that's kind of that's the thing. I'm making this music so it's can be accessible and listened to by even non-Christians. That's why it's not going to sound like a praise and worship album that only only Christians can listen to. It's going to be music that an atheist, frankly, would be able to listen to this and appreciate it for the music and the message. And that's kind of the goal, in a way, a pseudo-evangelization of this is a story that even non-Christians kind of need to hear, because there are so many marriages breaking down that it's like, I want to do whatever I can in my own very small way of helping them.
I think just keeping families together is such a battle in our culture and society today. There's just so many spiritual attacks, and a lot of times I think too there's a lack of, preparation of preparing for marriage. And as a Catholic, you have to be reminded that it's a sacrament. There's certain duties and obligations involved in everything, and but that's a path that puts us on a path of sanctification. It is a transforming aspect that we do. Same with religious life. You have to die to yourself, in order to grow in that vocation. And we all have to kind of experience that one way or another, and it can be very challenging. But we have to go to a break. But when we come back, let's get back to some of your songs and the messages involved.
Sounds great.
Tony, I'm wildly fascinated that you would incorporate Fulton Sheen into your music.
No worries.
And I think what's interesting is that when you listen to him, and he's been gone a while now, probably 40-something years, but when he was giving his talks, it's so relevant for today. And the fact that you would bring that into the music that you make for our listeners, I think is just a really. I think that brings a special touch and that special message. But your album Anchored it's really interesting because it's divided into kind of two parts. There's two different themes you seem to be working with, one on temptation and the other one on salvation. Can you talk about that first theme of temptation?
Sure. So, in the first part of our time together, you mentioned, and we talked about this idea of fame and fortune, right? I would say that, for me personally, was the temptation, to kind of throw away the marriage, to throw away the vocation for this very worldly endeavor. That was the temptation. That was the knife Satan was trying to drive into me. And so this album, kind of dividing in half, it's very transparent. It's very raw about my specific situation. And the reason I'm doing that is to kind of lean into, hey, this is what happened, and this is probably what happens to many couples, but this is just one story out of many that can hopefully help other marriages out there. So the temptation will go down basically a chronological timeline of a few days worth of time when things just got really bad. You know, the first song, it'll open up with an overture. So the first song is going to be a big overture, kind of incorporating all the melodies and themes that you'd kind of hear in an opera. You know, there's going to be this overture to this album. And then Disruption, which is a song that released on March 17th.
Okay.
Which is really about like the anger, right? I would say there were three things that were really breaking us apart, which was kind of all on my end, which was anger, frustration, and even a little bit of like this, I just hate this life that I had, right? It was very irrational, very irrational. And so Disruption kind of leans into that, like just those 2 a.m. shouting matches that were just tearing us apart. And so that first half is really about Satan's game. Satan just trying to pull us apart. Satan doesn't want marriages, you know, Satan doesn't want families.
Yeah.
And it was when my wife's health was kind of improving that we started talking about having children, right? That conversation was coming up because that was kind of an inhibition for us. And when those conversations were happening, that's when the division started taking place. That's when the disruption started taking place, which was a telltale sign. In hindsight, that was a telltale sign that it was all Satan just trying to get at us.
Yeah.
You know, as soon as children were even a thing, it's like, wow, okay, well, it's no wonder, you know, it's no wonder.
Now, what about salvation?
Yes.
What is that about?
So when we were at wit's end, and so there's the first song on the second half called Love and Be Merciful, which is released, which has Fulton Sheen.
Okay.
Which is kind of a prelude to then Confession, that's that first single. When I was at the rock bottom and I, you know, had to make that choice, okay, do I keep going down this path of destruction or do I turn to God? Turn to God. Went into adoration, you know, went and sat in front of the tabernacle. And there was a time where my pastor there at St. Mary's, I called him, I said, look, I don't know what we need to do. He told us to just, you know, let's just go pray. So Marie and I collectively, we together went to St. Mary's in Charlevoix. We sat down with the pastor, Father Peter, and Father Peter Wigton, and the prayer team they have there. They have a prayer team. They just all prayed with us. We just went into the pray for discernment. Pray for discernment for us. And we started praying together. And I'll tell you, I just started crying, like an unrestricted tears just coming out. Like there was zero resistance. Second thing was Father Peter asked me, are you sensing anything? And I kid you not, and I apologize if I get emotional because it's so powerful. I was seeing like a picture book of kids, of children. And it was like overwhelming of like, there was a clear indicator like, be open to kids, just be open. And then this huge sense of like bravery and courage. And so the second half of the album is about that moment and then how literally like nothing's changed. We have never been better since. Our marriage has been so amazing ever since that day. I fully believe we experienced a miracle. I have no doubt in my mind. There was this visceral change of heart, visceral change of just existence, of like, here before I wanted nothing to do with kids, and now it's like, I can't wait. I'm so excited. God willing, whenever that happens, I am so pumped, you know? And so the second half, the salvation, is all about that through faith and through prayer, we found redemption.
Yeah.
It was all God's hand. I had nothing to do with it. It was all God's hand.
That really speaks to the power of prayer.
Yes.
You know, and I think there is that aspect that when we do pray, you know, sometimes we don't even know what we even need to pray for.
Right.
You know, and sometimes there's that kind of hard examination that we have to do. But just to be open to those graces, you know, and to that vocation that God is calling us to, you know, and, you know, a lot of times the way our lives are written, you know, God is leading us on certain paths and everything. And how we get there, sometimes we don't even know, but it's just we're there.
Right, yeah.
You know, but just to have that, I think, that openness to God is so big. Because it's easy in our world today to shut God out. Just turn everything off, blot it all out, and just kind of live our life. That's very easy to do.
Yeah.
You know, and unfortunately, it's easy to get caught up in, you know, even in the religious life, you know. But again, that testimony to prayer, You know, and the fact that you can put that into music, you know, because there are so many attacks on the family, you know, that we don't even realize half of the time.
Right.
You know, it's just right at our front door.
Right.
But real quickly, what do you see as the biggest attack on the family right now?
I would say everything that's going on with just people don't even know who they are. They don't know what gender they are. They don't even know what's left or what's right or what's up and what's down. Kids are being destroyed, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. Children need parents to stay together.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that, it's so easy just to walk out the door these days. People just want to walk out the door. And that was almost me. That was almost me. And when I look back, I say, thank God I never did. I never made that choice, and I will never make that choice. So that, I just feel like we need to come back to what makes a family is togetherness and children.
Oh yeah.
Ultimately, that's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tony. And real quickly, where can we find more about your music?
Sure. If you go to manfredoniamusic.com, my last name, music.com, you'll find basically everything.
Okay.
All the links to everywhere.
Well, Tony, thank you for being on Life on the Rock and sharing your story, your gifts and talents. And so we thank you again for everything you've brought.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed that conversation with Tony and his honesty there. And it just struck me as real Christianity. You know, there's a cross, there's struggle, there's suffering, difficulty. There's also a resurrection.
Yeah.
And that's the point that stands out in that interview to me was, you know, when he turned to the Lord, it saved everything.
Yeah.
Because I think especially like in the life of an artist, you got a talent, a gift, it can very much take you down or you can use it for the Lord, right? It can be a source of whatever great difficulty in your life if we're not have things ordered in our life. And that's such a message for all of us. We have to turn to God to get our life right.
And I think there's that aspect that, you know, we're fallen, you know, but we're redeemed, you know, and that God has saved us. And a lot of times we do see people with great gifts, great talents, and everything just kind of blows up in their life. And you go, man, what happened? And I thought, you know, Tony said something really key that really kind of hit me. But whenever, you know, he's kind of listening to the problems, that he's saying, I hate my life. You know, and how true that can be in a lot of aspects of our life, whether that's work, or that's school, or that's in sports, whether that's in the priesthood or religious life or marriage, you know. And I think at that moment you can fall quickly into despair. But without God, you know, you will.
Right.
But it's, again, turning to God, you know, relying on His graces. I thought just that impact of prayer, of kind of just draining ourselves, emptying ourselves.
And I thought he did it in a way too, not just going to the Adoration Chapel by himself, going with his pastor and with a prayer team to pray for them.
Well, there's that sense of community too that builds us up, you know. And again, I think, you know, God, He's pulling us out of us, out of ourselves, you know, giving us a new take on life.
Well, the other thing I like there too is that, like you said, we can get real negative maybe about our vocation or what we're doing in life, but when we turn to God, there's a recovery of maybe that first love. Right? And he, you know, he just seemed rather dramatic talking about marriage as at first he didn't want children, then this conversion of openness to life, and what he said with conviction, that marriage is about togetherness and children. You know, Paul VI in Humanae Vitae talked about the unitive, the procreative meaning of marriage. And I love that. You can tell that God's at work to recover that maybe can get covered over at times, that we need help from others, we need God, and that prayer can, you know, can reawaken that. And you saw that conviction.
And
in
I
him.
think too, there's more than just a recovery, but even a renewal. But now you're on fire, on the zeal to do what is good, of what I am supposed to be doing, to embrace those sacrifices. You know, that's really the work of God, you know, in those moments.
All right. And we'll send you to that vineyard with a blessing. May our Heavenly Father shine His face upon you. May He give you His peace. May He send His Holy Spirit into your hearts, that you may know your own vocation in life, be renewed and restored and guided by Him. May Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week on Life on the Rock.
Lord, I don't know which way I am going, Lord, it feels like I'm lost out on the ocean. Lord, I know that everything I did was wrong, and now it feels like one more minute and she's gone. When the snow falls and her gaze starts to glisten in the moon, when her mind's eye becomes my starlight, illuminating truth. Is this what's left? A missed heartbeat. I can't forget what she gave me, yet here I stand, frozen to